Welcome to In Focus, where I have the opportunity to take a deep dive into a topic that you've asked me to take a deep dive into. Today, I want to talk to you about America. Actually, it's America Part 2, because on the 21st of this month, this is May of 2023, I released a video, Part 1, about the dividing of America. People have asked me what I think is happening, why America feels more divided now than perhaps any time in our lifetimes or beyond. And in that video, I described the methods, the tactics, the strategies that are being implemented to successfully divide us, and it is working, and the strategy as well as to how you may opt out of that division if it's something that you would like to do. I don't want to be redundant here, so if you haven't seen the first video, I'm going to invite you to check out the link below after this video. Don't do it now, but at the end of this video, and you will see that information. Today, I want to go a little bit deeper about America itself. Why would anyone want to divide America? What is it that makes America so special? What sets America apart from all other nations of the world for all time in history? A lot of our young people today are being taught things about America that simply aren't true. They're being told America is a bad country and that Americans are bad people. So right off the bat, I'm going to make a distinction here, very important distinction. I'm going to make a distinction between the idea of America that was laid down by the framers, the authors of the Constitution, and the authors of the Declaration of Independence. The ideas that give us a legal framework in this nation. And I am an American, I'm speaking to you as an American citizen. However, I know many of you are watching who are not in this country. And what I'm going to say to you is important, because what happens to America is also influencing what is happening on every other nation on the planet to some degree. Friends and not friends, those that are in our economic sphere and those that are not in our economic sphere. The choices and the direction that America goes are influencing the rest of the world. So I'm making this distinction between the idea that the framers laid down in the Declaration of Independence and in the Constitution and the implementation of those ideas. We are living the implementation, and right now the implementation is flawed. The freedoms, many of the freedoms that are described in the Constitution and in the Declaration have actually been used against the nation. The very freedoms that set this nation apart are now being used to divide and destroy the nation. So I want to make that distinction between the idea of America and the implementation of America. And you're going to hear me refer back to this a number of times. A lot of this comes today. I just kind of wanted to focus on a conversation that I had with a young man at a conference after I released the last video. Informally, it wasn't in front of the audience. In the hallway, he stopped me and simply asked me a question. He said, what is it about America that's so special? Is America worth saving? Because, and I say young man, I think he was probably in his late 20s. I don't know for sure, but seemed to me probably in his late 20s, where he had been inundated with the ideas that I mentioned earlier, that America is a bad country, America is responsible for a lot of bad ideas, and that the world would be better off without America. The reason I'm saying this, I believe that what he's referring to is the implementation, the current implementation of America. And he said to me, what is it, Greg, that makes America so special? What is it that I can do here I can't do in other countries in the world? He says, I can go to almost any country in Europe. I can go to, South America. I can have freedom of speech. I can worship the way that I want. If I want to purchase a firearm, I can do that. He said the governments of those countries let people do what you're doing right here. So what is so different? And in that statement, he just answered the question. And if you didn't catch it, here it is. He's absolutely correct, because there are nations now that are allowing their citizens to enjoy many of the freedoms that America has known for 247 years now. They enjoy those freedoms until they do not. And this is the point. Those other nations, the citizens, enjoy the freedoms because the government gives them those freedoms. That is not what has happened and is happening here in America. When you read the documents, and I'll share some of these with you here in just a moment. When you read the documents from our founding fathers, they identified that by virtue of the fact that we are alive, breathing, and walking this earth, there are freedoms that come with that living and with that breathing that are imbued upon us by God. And this is what they say in the Declaration. They're not given to us by our government. They're not given to us by any nation. And because of that, they could never be taken from us by any government or any nation. That is very different than the nations of the world. All the other nations, never in the history of the world that we're aware of, have those kinds of freedoms been imbued upon the citizens of a nation in the past, and it has not happened today. There is no other nation on the face of the earth. Many have attempted, and they have strategies that are similar. No other nation on the face of the earth has given its citizens the freedoms that American citizens enjoy today. And I want to talk to you about why that is, where the idea of America comes from. So let's just take a little step back. America was born from a very, very different time in our history. This year, 247 years ago from this year, 2023. And we have to bear in mind the situation in the world. The framers, the founders of this nation came from a nation, at that time it was England, where many of these freedoms were not allowed. They were not enjoyed. Freedom of religion, taxation without representation. You know, many of you have studied this when you were in school. If you're near to my age, young people are not being taught this in school, so they don't know. So out of a time where freedom, the kinds of freedoms we have today, was not common, these men came together. Now, they were men. It was a patriarchal society. There weren't a lot of women in politics, at least not that I'm aware of, in the world 247 years ago. So they were men. 56 men came together and put these ideas together. Who were these men? Well, we know a lot about them. There were military men, there were generals, there were politicians, there were business people, and there were everyday people. There were farmers that came together to create the idea of America. We know with certainty that 8 of those men were Freemasons because it's documented, and there is supporting evidence to suggest that perhaps as many as 13 were linked to the Masonic traditions. And this is important because of the principles of Freemasonry that are reflected in our founding documents. So these men came together, and what they did, I mean, it's such a radical idea of what they did. They declared these freedoms, and if they had gotten it wrong, if America had not succeeded, what they did was treason, and they would have been tried and executed for the treason, the treasonous document and the treasonous ideas that they created. So they put their lives on the line. What was it they did was so treasonous? Let me just share with this with you. And if you've never read this, you will be interested in what I'm saying. And if you have read it and it's been a while, I'm going to invite you to go back and check it out once again. The document that describes the philosophy of America is called the Declaration of Independence. It is a philosophical as well as a legal document. And I'm just going to read one sentence. And I know you've heard this before, but let's dissect this a little bit. What was so radical? The founder said, we hold these truths to be self-evident. All right, right there. Self-evident means they're so obvious that they shouldn't even have to be spelled out. But what are these truths that are self-evident? They say all men are created equal. Now, today, a lot of young people get hung up with the syntax. They get hung up with the terminology because the term is all men. 247 years ago, the term man was inclusive of male and female. You see this not just in politics, but you see it in the scientific references, anthropology. for example, the descent of man, or the fall of man, or the ascent of man meeting the human species, men and women. I'm not saying it's right, wrong, good, or bad. What I am saying is, if you're going to really grasp the significance and the sacredness of what this document says, we have to look beyond the syntax of the time 247 years ago. So we hold these truths to be self-evident. It's obvious. All men are created equal. They are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. Unalienable means they cannot be taken away. All right. And they don't come from a government. We are endowed by our creator with these rights. And among these, not all of them, there's others, but among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I know many of you have heard that before. A lot of younger people are not, because this stuff is not being taught in the classrooms in America. We're going on the second generation now, where young people are not being taught about the true history of our country. They are being taught information, selected, cherry-picked data that does not accurately reflect what this nation is all about. Now, I want to say something else, because a lot of the pushback that I get from young people about our nation and why it is a bad nation and why we're bad people is because of what they see as the hypocrisy of what the founders lived in their lives versus what they wrote in the documents. And I can see where they would see that, because the founders came from a world where many injustices that we see today were common, including slavery. Slavery, America didn't found slavery, didn't begin there. It began over 6,000 years ago in Mesopotamia. And every race has enslaved its own race, and they've enslaved other races, often as a result of war. At the end of a battle, those of the opposite side, the opposing side, who are not killed, are often taken captive and enslaved for some period of time, or maybe for the rest of their lives. So America didn't found the slave trade. So what I'm saying is, and this is really interesting, I want to just make this point. These ideas that were spelled out that are so profound and so sacred, and I'm going to elaborate on these a little bit, they came through human men who were flawed. They are flawed because they are human. If they weren't saints. If they weren't flawed, they would be in another realm, in another world. They would be in the angelic realm somewhere. These were physical men that came from a world of injustice. They were founding a new nation. And I'm going to separate fact from my personal belief now. My personal belief, I personally believe that the nation of the United States of America, through these documents, the idea of America was an act of divine intervention. And I'm going to share with you why I say that. I believe that these principles were divinely inspired then, 247 years ago, so that the world would have a nation with these freedoms that the world could aspire to now, to get us through, to meet the challenges that we find at our doorstep now, in a world that is moving, being driven, being compelled toward authoritarianism, toward centralized governments, centralized finance, centralized control. We're going head over heels into war right now. And I believe that the principles, again, the idea of America was founded to give the world the opportunity to aspire to something greater than what it had in the time, and to develop that over those almost 250 years, so that it could help us through the change that we're living now, the shift, the convergence of cycles that ancient traditions, including Freemasons, knew was coming. They knew 250 years, they may not have known the specifics. They knew a big change was coming, because it always does. It's cyclic. And as a scientist, as a geologist, there's another conversation. I've got videos about those cycles. It's no secret that cycles, on a cyclic, rhythmic basis, the world goes through big changes. And how we embrace those changes determines whether or not we come through them with a soft landing or a hard landing. How can we embrace those changes in a healthy way? Well, the freedoms enshrined in the idea of America, offered us, stacked the deck in our favor, gave us the opportunity to move through what we are in now and what we're about to go into as a nation and as a planet in a healthier way. So this is the Declaration. Now, the Declaration, they're cool ideas, radical, beautiful ideas of freedom imbued by God. No nation can take them away because nations didn't give them to us. But this document has no teeth, no way to enforce it. That's what the Constitution is all about. So when the framers developed the Constitution and the original amendments to the Constitution, spelling out what this nation would look like to ensure these freedoms, there were amendments that were then made to those original amendments, and the 10 amendments are called the Bill of Rights. And this is what you're hearing about when people say the Constitution. Typically today in legacy media, mainstream media, they're talking about the Bill of Rights. Usually the first, second, at least the first and second amendments in the Bill of Rights. So the first, what is that First Amendment? First Amendment, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of assembly, and freedom of petition. The Second Amendment is about the right to keep and bear arms. Right, a lot of controversy around both of these. Both of these are being eroded. Both of them are slipping away. You and I know we cannot say, well, you can say anything you want, and there is a very high price to be paid for speaking your opinion these days. And we are in the process now of losing. The implementation of America is losing many of these freedoms. So I want to say this because it is the implementation that's flawed. I am not happy about many of the choices that my country has made, especially since the end of the Cold War. I'm not happy with what we've done in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Libya, in Syria, in Yemen, and so many other places. I can't even list them all. That's the implementation. Please don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Please don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We're coming into an election cycle. It's going to be a rough election cycle this year because our nation is so polarized. And there are those in this election cycle who are citing the flawed implementation to do away with America, to start over, or to redo the Constitution. Or they say the Constitution is obsolete, it's outdated, okay, because of the way it's been implemented. So it's the implementation, but not the idea. And this is what I really want to emphasize. Honestly, I don't know how America is going to survive these next few years. There are many predictions from many really well-known people. Some of them are economists. Some of them have very sophisticated computer algorithms that have been correct on all of the economic models that they have produced. Some of them are scientists, some of them are philosophers, all saying that America as we know it may not survive through these beginning in 2025 is what some of them are saying. I don't know if that's true or not. I know that we will probably not survive as the America that you and I have known, because that America is fast disappearing. The America that we've known in the past is disappearing, but something will replace it. Something will be here. And the reason I'm saying this is because I'm inviting you, because you are we the people. At least right now, we the people have the power imbued within our population by these legal documents. Is it being honored 100% of the time? No. But the framework, this is the key. The legal framework is still there. And there are legal cases reclaiming that framework of freedom of speech and religion and the right to assemble and all of those things, Second Amendment, all of those. And there's a lot of skewed information out there about what these mean to us. So whatever it is that emerges over these next few years, I think it's important. I believe that the idea of America is not obsolete, that it is so rare, it is so profound, it is so radical, and it is precious. Because if we lose the idea of America. No nation will ever give its people the freedoms that were given to us 247 years ago. No nation will ever give the power and the freedom to the individuals, because it's that power and freedom that checks the power of the government. No nation is going to allow that to happen again. So I think this is something really, really important to think about. The young man that I was speaking about, what makes America so different? He didn't realize that governments give other people, other European nations and nations in the Pacific and South America, he didn't realize the governments were the ones giving those freedoms. And that's why when times get tough, like during a lockdown, those freedoms can be taken away. Now, can they be suspended temporarily in America through executive order? Sure, they can. And there are legal challenges against those, and those executive orders are temporary. They cannot be taken away permanently as long as we've got the framework, the legal framework of the Constitution in place. Another one of the concerns that this young man, other young people have shared with me, is they say, if America is a democracy, then how come these things happen? How come the popular vote is not reflected in an election, for example? It's a really good question. And the answer to that, actually, the answer was recorded on the steps of Independence Hall as the Constitution was being drafted, and the Declaration was being drafted. I mean, this must have been a really interesting time, coming together, building a new nation, and putting a framework together for this nation. And during one of the breaks, Benjamin Franklin left, and he was accompanied by another man who wrote this statement down. It is now in the National Archives. So we know that this is not hearsay. This is actually what happened. There was a woman sitting on the steps of Independence Hall, and Dr. Benjamin Franklin, he was a doctor. He came out the door, and I just want to read you exactly. I want to get the words right. She said, "Well, doctor, what have we got?" She was saying, "What kind of a country are you giving to us? A republic or a monarchy?" Because those were the choices that people were aware of during this time in the mid 1700s. And Benjamin Franklin replied with a very mysterious statement that probably makes more sense now than it did then. Listen to what he said. She says, what kind of a government are we going to have? He says, a republic if you can keep it. A republic if you can keep it. We don't have a true democracy. In a true democracy, here's a true democracy. Let me just give you an example. If you lived in a village of 100 people, and you and 4 of your neighbors wanted to raise chickens, all right? And so that's 5 of you out of 100. That means 95 do not want you to raise chickens. They say, that's not what our community is all about. Chickens are dirty. We don't want them here. In a pure democracy, those 95 would rule. It's what's called mob rule. In a pure democracy, those 95 could override the will and the rights of those 5 and say, okay, you can't raise chickens, and you would never be able to raise chickens. In a republic, and this is what we were given, in a republic, it is governed by documents that ensure the rights of the individual as well as the community. All right. So in a republic, if you're 100 people in your village was a republic, and you had a written document, a constitution, that said every family shall have the right to raise chickens, poultry, to provide for their family, immediate family and extended family and neighbors, the food and the nourishment they need. All right. Those 95 people might not want that, but it's a right that is guaranteed to you, and your right will be upheld if that form of government is recognized. That's a republic. That's what we have. We actually have, the technical term is a federal democratic republic. And it's the same idea. We don't have a village of 100 people. Our founders knew that this was going to be, if it worked, it was going to be a big nation. And I don't know that they knew it was going to go from one ocean to another, from sea to shining sea. But they knew it was going to be big. what they knew is that we would be a geographically diverse nation. We would be a climatologically diverse nation. What's happening in South Florida isn't happening in the Cascades. They knew that we would be a resource rich and diverse nation. We've got a lot of different resources. They knew that one size could not fit all. So that's the reason that we have a representative form of government rather than just a pure democracy where the mob rules. In our nation right now, the population centers are concentrated in the Northeast and Southern California, Los Angeles, and California, the state of California, and all up along the eastern seaboard, and a little bit, in some other places, but primarily in those two places. In the places where I live, in the mountain states, my state of New Mexico, it's a big land state. We have a lot of space, only about 1.5 million people. And 1 million of those live only in one city. Only 500,000 live outside of the rest of the city of Albuquerque, New Mexico. Those numbers are shifting a little bit after COVID, but historically, the numbers look approximately that ratio. So think about what that means. It means when an idea is embraced, if the idea is embraced in the Northeast and in Southern California and Los Angeles, and the rest of the country doesn't want it, if it was mob rule, if it was pure democracy, those two population centers could determine where the whole nation is going, even if the ideas didn't fit because of climate, because of geography, because of capital expended and revenue and the way the states are run individually. But we don't have that. You are guaranteed individual rights. Among those, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, described and elaborated upon in the Constitution, so the mob doesn't rule. That nuance is not being shared with a lot of our young people today, and they don't understand that a republic is actually a more powerful form of government because the rights of the individual are ensured. You can't be rolled over by just because there's more people that don't agree with you doesn't mean you lose your rights. So these are some of the ideas that I think is important to bear in mind as we consider what is happening with America. One of the fascinating things to me, I'm a student of history, and I think it's important. I'm a geologist, so I'm a student of big history, billions of years, but I'm also a student of human history and civilization. And this founding of America didn't happen in a vacuum. And it's fascinating because the men who were creating the nation sensed that what they were doing was big. And they wrote letters back and forth that have been preserved and documented. You can go and read these letters. They were writing back and forth to one another, asking what are the implications down the road if we put this in the Constitution. And of course, they didn't have computers 247 years ago. Those 56 men had no idea whether or not, number one, America would even work, if it was going to be successful. If it was, would it last a year, 5 years, 247 years, or 500 years? They didn't know. If it did last 250 years, 247 years, they had no idea of what challenges would face the nation specifically. They didn't know what technology would look like. They had no way of knowing. We'd have an internet, we'd have computers. They didn't know. And social media, they had no way of knowing. Militarily, they had no way of knowing what the weapons would look like. So look at what they did. And I'm even more in awe of our founders when I think about this. They didn't take the specifics, they took the generalities, and they modeled and simulated them on paper and parchment is what they were writing on. They simulated the possibilities. What if America is attacked from the water, from the oceans? And they wrote remedies to that. Well, what if America is attacked from within? What if the freedoms granted to the people are abused by the people and used to tear the country apart? They wrote remedies to that. What if the government itself uses the freedoms that are guaranteed to the nation and takes those freedoms and turns them on the people to destroy the nation? They had remedies for that. So the Constitution is not obsolete, and the ideas in the Declaration are not obsolete. The principles themselves are not obsolete. Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, the ability to defend an individual, to defend a family and a community, to defend a nation, the ability to share ideas, the ability to worship in the way that we feel that we want to worship, the ability to write what we want to write. Those are not obsolete. They are being eroded, and we all can cite examples of where they have been overridden because the implementation is flawed. We're losing those freedoms in America right now. So as the ideas, and you're going to see these, as the ideas emerge, trying to convince you that America is a bad place, American people are bad people, that the nation is flawed, that the implementation, as I said, I agree that it is flawed, that we need to scrap this all and start over. I'm going to invite you to make this distinction between the idea of America and the way it's been implemented. We can scrap the implementations. I'm thinking that we are best served to hold tight, hold close, and cherish the idea of America. You know, it really comes down to love. The bottom line, this all comes down to love. And the question that we have to ask ourselves is simply this: do we love ourselves enough? Do you love yourself enough to do what needs to be done in your life, every day in your life, to preserve the freedoms that were given to you, divinely inspired freedoms that were given to you 247 years ago? Do you love yourself enough to embrace those freedoms, to make the choices in your life out of the love of what's possible, rather than out of the fear of what happens if you don't make those choices? That's a huge difference. I've talked about that in other videos. But that's where we are right now. We're being told disinformation, misinformation, some flat out lies about the country to lead us to make choices based on the fear of what happens if we don't. That's very different than exercising the freedoms that were given to us, the gift of the freedoms that are so rare in 6,000 years of human history and so rare in the world today, making our choices out of the love of what those freedoms mean in our lives, the freedom to imagine and to innovate and to create and to write and create books and create music and create art and create dance, create community, live our lives in a way that reflects the deep truth of our relationship to the land, to our bodies, to one another, and to the cosmos. These are ideas I want you to think about. Now, some of them may seem a little abstract right now. Over the next weeks and months, I believe you are going to see efforts, you're going to see proposals, you will see plans, you'll see policies that say that we need to remake America. And maybe we do. I'm not going to say it's right, wrong, good, or bad. What I'm going to say is I'm going to invite you to always make the distinction between the idea, the purity of the dream, and the freedoms of the idea of America, separate those from the flawed implementation that we have now that results from the abuse of power and the corruption that the freedoms have made possible for the governments. And it's not any one government, any one administration. This has happened over decades now, and we're seeing the culmination of this. Ultimately, it comes down to love. What choices allow our heart to sing and allow our soul to soar and feel the gift that the freedoms give to us to create and imagine and innovate? And this is what I wanted to say to you today. This is what I'm inviting you to think about over these next weeks and months. So I hope you have enjoyed this conversation as much as I've enjoyed putting it together for you. It's unscripted, obviously, no PowerPoint slides. I've got a few notes so that I can be accurate when I'm speaking with you. Drop me a line in the comments. Let me know. Check out the links in the video below for some context for some of the other videos. Thank you so much. I look forward to our next.